Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for helping us out and bringing everybody back in. So yeah, huge thank you to everybody for their cooperation. Big hand for people who prepared lunch. So a big thank you to them. And do I have some barbecue sauce coming down my face? Hope not. So. But listen, we've got a very special announcement here and an event about to unroll, and I'd like to call up Vice Chief Tsannie to kind of lead us through this next stage of the agenda. So.
Thank you, Gary. I do want to acknowledge the drum group for today's grand entry, the elder for the opening prayer. I do acknowledge the community members and the leadership here. Folks, Grand Council, the membership, we've been working regarding the policing initiative since back in 2018, and we've come a long way. We're ready today to sign that letter of intent between the parties, between Canada, the province, and the Prince Albert Grand Council on behalf of our First Nations communities. What this will do is engagement with our First Nation communities and look at the RCMP that we have in our communities. What are needed, do the evaluation, and how do we move forward and design a policing model that will best serve the First Nation with all our First Nation, 28 communities within the Prince Albert Grand Council. It's a huge undertaking. And we got the initiatives and the mandate from our leadership to look at alternative ways in terms of creating a safe community for our community members and our children. So I do want to acknowledge today our guests that are here for the signing of the letter of intent. Minister Medicino from Canada. Let's give him a round of applause and make him feel welcome. And also we got Minister Tal with the Province Public Safety and Corrections. She's here today. Minister Tal, thank you for joining us. So with that being said, what will happen here today is we'll have the speeches. Grand Chief will speak. And then after the speeches, we'll get Gary to read out the letter of intent. And we'll have the signing ceremony in terms of we can now do the work and go back to our communities. And the engagement will happen throughout the winter. We have 18 months to finish the work. So there'll be a lot of engagements, a lot of talk about policing within our communities. So with that, I'll hand it over to Grand Chief for his comments. Grand Chief Hardlotte.
Thank you, Vice Chief Tsannie, Vice Chief Lanate. Now I acknowledge you all here. Minister Marco, a Minister of Public Safety, Federal Minister, part of the Liberal government. Of course, Christine Tell from the province, and she is a Corrections and Public Safety Minister. We're here to sign a document to make our communities safe. If we work together, if you support your chief and your councillors and work with the Prince Albert Grand Council. In 2018, as Vice Chief mentioned, we had the mandate. Thank you, chiefs, for that mandate. What did that mandate say? To work towards community safety and to work towards self-administered policing. And the work has been done. In November, before the pandemic, 2019, Prince Albert Grand Council, and I thank all our technical staff for the work that they done. And that was putting on the policing and also a justice symposium in Saskatchewan of that year, of that month in November. So that the purpose of that very important conference was to bring you, the people of this conference. It was well attended, but sometimes we have those challenges of the chief and the councillors being very busy in their communities. But we still had a good attendance. And I thank all our people, technical staff that did provide the work to make that possible. Chief and councillors, we do have immediate challenges in public safety, community safety. And what is that? We have outdated CTAs, community tripartite agreements. We asked the federal government to co-develop that CTAs. What are CTAs? Many of you know what CTAs are. It's the First Nations policing agreements. And it's a three-way agreement. It's outdated. We need to work on that. Chiefs, councillors, delegates, your bylaws that you make in your First Nations, are they enforced by the RCMP? They are not. That's immediate. Your BCRs, your band council resolutions, are they honored? Are they enforced by the RCMP? They are not. That's immediate. Who can make that change? Right here, we got the ministers here that can make that change. Okay, so I commend the communities that have community safety officers. Some communities call them just security, community security guards. Others call them peacekeepers. But they do the same thing. They assist what police force is in the community to make that community a safe community. I commend those community. These initiatives that you, the chiefs, and your councillors have done over the years, their own source funding, right? You take care of them. You provide the money from the limited resources funding that you get from the federal government. That's another immediate that we can address. So the detachment in the communities, we have many detachments, RCMP detachments in their communities, but we have communities that don't have detachment. That's an immediate concern that we have to work on, chiefs. But the thing that we're working, what we're signing here to work towards self-administered policing, to have our own police officers in our communities, to have that opportunity for the young people. And this is the work that we can do. We can only achieve it if we work together and we work in our communities. Of course, from the support, from the two levels of government. With that support, we can do that. And that's what we are trying to do. And that was the very purpose of that conference that we did. From that conference, we give it to the federal government. They wanted a copy. We did that. We did that. After that, they made announcement that policing is an essential service. I do believe it was from that conference and talking about policing why the federal government did that. And I commend them for that. It makes those challenges of those self-administered policing that are in the communities now, those challenges of funding, and they do have challenges, they did. But because of this legislation, now they won't have those challenges, the money will flow. And that's what we're hoping to achieve in this signing of this document. I commend everybody, all the police officers that were in the grand entry with us, the city police that we work with, to make this city, our city, a safe place. Thank you, John and Farika, for that. Thank you, Brian, Indigenous Policing. We have a lot of work to do. I thank you very much here. Let's do this. Let's do this work. Let's sign this document. And that's what I said to the ministers here. We are elected people, and we want this to happen. And let's see it happen. We all want it. So I encourage all of you, the leadership, the chiefs with their council members, let's make our communities a safe place for our community members, for our children to go to school.
Thank you, Grand Chief. I do want to acknowledge Melanie. If you want to do a quick wave here, Melanie's here. Melanie's helping with the legislation where we want to make community policing an essential service. I do thank you very much for being here. We met with Melanie and we contributed through the Grand Council into those engagements throughout the winter, and will continue to be part of the legislation that's going to be drafted. Community safety plans is also equally as important as policing. We want to engage the community and help and to continue to support the training and ongoing support for our communities in developing those community safety plans. You'll hear more about it in the coming months. Policing is one thing, but without the community safety plans, it's kind of hard. It'd be hard to engage and to create and making our community safe. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chief Burns, James Smith Cree Nation, to address the Assembly.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, I'd just like to thank the Creator for blessing us with a wonderful day. I was told when I speak, I got to speak from the heart, not my mind. I'd like to say that today was a good day on dialogue, dealing with the trauma with our people, asking them and requesting them how they feel. This morning it was very hard. A lot of them broke down. And to me, this shouldn't have happened to anybody or any nation. So I'm very honored to have Minister Marco and also discussions that we had in James Smith with the family members on how we can cope and move forward. Moving forward is another tool in regards to working together on finding solutions to making sure that we help our membership to heal. Ever since it started, September 4th, I was in ceremony. The first call led to 100 calls. And to me, this first call was very hurt. Losing a brother, sisters, nephews, aunties, uncles. And it's so hard because a lot of it goes back into the community, and how are we supposed to cope with all of this? How are we supposed to move together? Moving together as a nation is another thing. Raising a child is another area. And you know, I'm very happy we had one person in our discussions this morning. He resigned. But we had to push back because we had to give him time. And I'm very fortunate that he came and spoke today and this morning. We need him. We need him in our community, in our NADAP area. So I commend Daryl Burns for standing up and looking at the needs for our nation, for any nation, on how we can move forward on healing. So we did a lot of communications in regards to pushing forward what needs to be funded. NAIDAP is another area of means, and how do we support our membership that needs healing. The drug situation, the drug dealers, on-reserve policing, security. The way I see security right now, yeah, that's just a piece of the iceberg. So what are they going to do when they encounter a big mess? Drug dealers, what are they going to do? Hit them with their flashlight? Safety is another concern in regards to looking at different obstacles and how we should police our own community. This is a need, and it's a necessity. It's like Vice Chief said, Grand Chief, and the other chiefs that spoke. We need our own policing, our own training. Where do we start? We plant that seed in the education part with our youth and telling them, this is what we need. Post-secondary is another thing. We need to emphasize and making sure that we push from grade 1 to grade 12 into this area. I don't want to see this happening to another community. It hurts. It hurts so much. I didn't even get debriefed because ever since day one, when they started, lack of sleep. But you know what? The faith has me going. The hope. And this is what I want to see in regards to moving forward, signing documents in front of the people on how we can push the envelope on reserve policing. You know, I like to thank Siksika on having their own policing. Next week we're going to sit down with them in Calgary, taking the whole staff over there and how we can overcome this whole thing on policing. So tomorrow is going to be another event. I have an opportunity to sit down with more RCMP members in ceremony. So they're asking me, they want to go into a sweat lodge. So I'm making that time. I'm not going to be here tomorrow, but I'll designate somebody to sit on my spot. So these are the factors, and this is real, and I want to make sure that nobody goes through this ordeal. And one last comment. Before the Queen had passed, we had the opportunity to have one final letter from her with her signature, sending her condolences to James Smith Cree Nation and to the membership and to the families. That's a great honor before she passed. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We been engaged with Sask Polytechnic in terms of the training opportunities to in terms of training our police force. We need to look at that model as well. There's many partners in policing with the F Division, with the institutions, the universities in terms of the justice field. This is a step in terms of occupying that field in terms of justice for our communities. We're not alone, and I do want to acknowledge again the partnership, the friendship that we've developed with the province and the feds in terms of moving forward. Seeing that common goal of making our community safe is very important. So I do want to acknowledge that work from our partners with the feds and the province. and the work will continue. But we do, in moving forward in terms of the policing program, we're not infringing of any communities. We want to come into the community and do that evaluation, making sure that we engage with the grassroots people and talk about how do we make our community safe. That's what it's about. Then hopefully eventually lead to a self-administered community-based policing in the future. So with that, I'll give the opportunity to Chief Cameron to address the Assembly. Chief Cameron.
Thank you, Vice Chief Smythe, Grand Chief Hardlotte, Minister Marco and Minister Tell, and Chief and Councils, elders, women, youth, Chief and Councils, and all those that are here, the delegates. This is working towards what each and every one of you have been advocating for and stating for many, many years. You want alcohol and drugs banned on your First Nation. That's what this is working towards. You want drug dealers banned and charged from your First Nation, and in some cases even evicted and banned. That's what this is working towards. Eventually we're going to get to the point where, in conjunction, in partnership with the provincial government and the federal government, to create our own First Nation policing association, driven from the band members of each First Nation, your committees, your elders, eyes and ears on the ground. So that's what these agreements are about. To the PA Grand Council and the many others, Red Earth and your restorative justice work you've been working towards. Some good work has went on and will continue to go on here at the Prince Albert Grand Council. All the years of advocating and all the years of trial and error and some challenging times. The voices when we hear the chief and councils when they call us about the difficulties they're facing. That's what this agreement is intended for. Community safety driven from the community. Driven from each First Nation and their band members. And our elders. Thank you for being a part of this historic day. Very historic day, but we're going to continue. Our senators will say this, that justice was a big component of treaty. When they were signing treaty in the 1800s, early 1900s, the chief said, what if your people harm my people? What if your people do wrong to my people? Alexander Morris and others, representing the crown, saw the red coat and asked the red coat to stand up. The red coat stood up, and this is what he said before treaty was signed. I will assign a red coat to your community to keep peace, harmony, and safety to your people. That's the significance of justice and treaty. This is a part of it. Treaty implementation in that whole justice component. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We all know we have the biggest resources in our communities. More than mining, more than anything else that we have in all the northern communities that we have. We have 28 First Nation communities. This is a huge undertaking. I'm so happy to be here today with all the negotiations that had happened. But our biggest resources is our young people. Why do we want to do this? Why not? We're here to open the doors. A lot of our young people are looking for opportunities. Why not the justice field? Why can't we encourage our children to go to school and get a proper education and get into the justice policing field? We have to do that in terms of occupying that field. We don't have to run away from RCMP when we see the RCMP. because we want to make the RCMP part of a community. Not the solution to a community, but part of a community. And we have to take that responsibility together in making our community safe. So with that, I want to introduce Minister Tell with the province of Saskatchewan. They've been part of our discussions and negotiations, and they're a willing partner. They want to see change and make our community safe as well. So I want to truly thank Minister for being here and addressing the Assembly. Minister Tell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Minister Medicino, Grand Chief Brian Hardlotte, Vice Chief Joseph Tsannie, Chief Wally Burns, elders. Oh, and I must mention, too, he was a late comer here today, was Chief Cameron. Elders, PAGC, member nation, chiefs, and council special guests in attendance here this afternoon, welcome. I'm honored to be here on Treaty 6 territory for the official signing of the letter of intent between Prince Albert Grand Council, the Government of Canada, and the Government of Saskatchewan. The letter of intent formalizes the commitment to develop an implementation plan to address public safety and policing for the communities of the Prince Albert Grand Council member nations. Government of Saskatchewan recognizes the value of community-oriented policing for First Nations and Indigenous communities. Indeed, the tragic events at Smith Cree Nation in early September have highlighted more than ever that this is an area that needs to be addressed by all levels of government. The letter of intent will establish Prince Albert Grand Council Public Safety Implementation Team to identify the community safety and police service needs of the Prince Albert Grand Council communities. Collaboration, partnership, and respect are all imperative as we move forward with this strategy. We know there is more work to be done, but big changes happen with small steps. And this is the first step in the process that will shape the coming years. This letter of intent is part of our government's ongoing commitment of ensuring safe communities for all. I would like to thank all the chiefs, elders, and representatives of the Prince Albert Grand Council for being here today and working with our government on this important initiative. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Minister. Next, with engagement with Canada, the team that we have, Minister mentioned the Prince Albert Grand Council Public Safety Implementation Team will be created, and they will identify the work how that work's going to look like within the communities, with the engagement with our First Nations communities. So with that, Minister, thank you for being here and your team. You have an awesome team that's working with you. Jen and Matt in the back, the province. I do acknowledge your commitment and your continued support in terms of making our community safe. That's what it's about at the end of the day. So thank you very much, Minister, for being here. So next, the Minister Medicino with Public Safety Canada, I'll call you up to the podium and address the Assembly. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that kind and generous welcome. Grand Chiefs, to our elders, to everybody who is here, thank you so much for welcoming me to Treaty 6 for this important occasion. I also want to thank Chief Burns for welcoming me to Smith Cree this morning. We had a very heavy and difficult meeting with the families of the victims this morning, and there really is no words that can do justice to the grief that they're still feeling, the trauma that they're still feeling, the pain that they're still feeling. It was a sacred moment for me because it was my first time to be in person with them. and they were so honest about just the difficult moment that they're still in right now. And even as they were expressing their grief, there was perseverance, there was strength, there was great pride in the culture, the language, and the history of James Smith Cree. And I have felt it throughout my conversations, not only today, but in the last number of months in the role that I serve as Minister of Public Safety. And, you know, it is that strength that has to be the motivation. There are words that are inscribed in the council chamber at James Smith Cree Nation. And it says, remember us. And we have to remember the victims on September 4th. We have to remember the victims and the survivors of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We have to remember the victims and the survivors of residential schools. That has to be our motivation. That's why we're here today. That's why we've come, to be a good faith partner. And, you know, only by implementing the calls to justice, the calls to action, which our government is dedicated to achieving with you, can we take that next concrete step on the road to reconciliation. And it is a cornerstone of reconciliation that policing for Indigenous people, by Indigenous people, is at the very heart of the work that we are doing today. That is the message that you have communicated to me. You know your communities. You know your younger generation, the ones that are coming up. I've seen them. I've met with them. And we need to create the space to empower you to keep your community safe. That's what signing this letter of intent is all about today. And I know that there's a commitment from the RCMP to make the relationship right, to respect language, to respect culture, to respect tradition, to respect history. And that work is not easy. It's not easy. But we're going to do it. It's like you said, Grand Chief, we're going to do that work together. That's why we're here today. I also think even as we sign this letter and we foreshadow a moment where we'll create more Indigenous policing, that it's not just about law enforcement. Healing has to be done through prevention, which means we've got to look at those root causes that you know well, the challenges with substance and violence and organized crime. And we look to you for leadership on how we can reduce those challenges. It means making sure that there's enough housing, enough health care, safe education for young people so that they're equipped to make the right choices. And we know that they can. You know, there's another thing that I saw in the at James Smith Cree Nation. There's a beautiful mural. It just says hope. And in the letters of that word are the signatures of the residents of the residents of that community, the leaders of that community, the people that have come to visit like me. It's going to take hope, but it's also going to take hard work if we want to break the cycle so that there is no more James Smith Cree Nation, so that there's no more MMIGW, so that there's no more residential schools. And I just want to tell you, we're gonna walk that talk. And thank you again so much for welcoming me. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
So with that, thank you, Minister, for being here today and addressing the Assembly. And we'll continue to advocate. There's a process. We need to do our work, making sure we do a good quality job. Not just the status quo. We know the challenges that we have with the RCMP within our communities. We don't want to be underfunded and struggling just to get by. We want to make sure if we develop a model, it's top-notch, that our people deserve, and take our rightful place and make our community safe. So with that, I want to thank our guests that are here. I want to acknowledge the staff. Again, the staff that's been working so hard, everybody that contributed to getting us to where we are today, and to the community and the leadership for giving us that mandate to look at the policing and how can we make it better for our First Nation communities. So with that, Assembly, I'll hand it over to Gary, Mr. Speaker. He'll read over the letter of intent, and then we'll get into the signing of the document afterwards. And then after the signing, the guests, the three parties, James Smith, they'll go in the back room. The media will be welcomed in the back room. If there's any questions and answers, they'll be done in the back room. So thank you very much. Gary?
Yep. Thank you, Vice Chief. So thank you to all the speakers, and I'll cut right to the reading of this document here, the letter of intent. The purpose of the letter of intent is to formalize a collaborative working relationship between the Prince Albert Grand Council and the Government of Canada and the Government of Saskatchewan in meeting the objective of developing an implementation plan for community-oriented public safety and policing, which addresses specific community safety protective services needs of the Prince Albert Grand Council member nations and communities. The Prince Albert Grand Council is the Grand Council organization representing 12 First Nations comprised of 28 communities in northern Saskatchewan, which are organized into 4 sectors: the Athabasca Denisutlane, the Plains Dakota Cree, Swampy Cree, and the Woodland Cree. The Prince Albert Grand Council has expressed a desire to enhance community safety planning for its member nations. PAGC also desires to ensure effective and culturally appropriate police services within its communities. Canada and Saskatchewan are committed to implementing the calls for justice from the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. These calls for justice include all governments supporting changes that are culturally appropriate and effective within Indigenous policing from its current state. Canada and Saskatchewan are committed to community-oriented public safety and policing and working in the spirit of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples through renewed relationships based on respect, cooperation, and partnerships. The collaborative working relationship will be established through a working group with representation from each party, referred to as the Prince Albert Grand Council Public Safety Implementation Team. The parties enter into this letter of intent with the purpose to collectively support the identified objective. This letter of intent is not a contract and does not create any legally binding or enforceable obligations between or amongst any of the parties. However, in expression of the parties' present commonly shared intentions and objectives and their desires to conduct themselves in a manner consistent with the contents of this letter of intent. Each has caused it to be signed by their respective representatives on the date today. So we'll now have them grab their pens and proceed with signing. 3, 2, 1. They switch them? We got to do 3. That's one more. Okay, once they're done signing, we'll get them to hold the letter of intent up and maybe perhaps stand as well and hold up the letter of intent for pictures and photos for all to see. And they'll be making their way back to one of the back rooms, and they will be hosting a bit of a media question and answer back there. So, With that, thank you very much. We will have, just to be on deck, our Prince Albert Development Corporation financial statements report, so we'll get them queued up here. Jean Dirk, Keith Fonstad, Todd Robertson, be on deck, please, and thank you.
Hi there, I'm Tim Warmington. I'm Manager of Public Affairs at Public Safety Canada. We're here today after our historic announcement and letter signing. I'm joined by Minister Tell, Minister Medicino, Minister Hardlotte, and the other chiefs and vice chiefs. So just before we get going, I just invite Grand Chief Hardlotte to say a couple words.
No, thank you very much, Tim. I'd just like to thank the media outlets here for this announcement, this historic announcement, the letter intent signing, and they want to acknowledge our Tribune, your own Rasty, Willie Billet, MBC Dene announcer, and Abel Charles, the Cree announcer from the MBC radio. Thank you, gentlemen. Of course, the other media outlets, the chiefs that are here. I welcome you all. Of course, Mayor, Worship, the MLA. Thank you, Minister Tell and Minister Marco, and the chiefs that are here. I think we'll just go with the questions, and we will answer the questions. Thank you very much, and thank you very much at the Prince Albert Council Assembly, and for our people to be able to witness the signing, an important signing. Our First Nations, our member nations, and their band councillors, their elders, and also their delegates of the community, and many of the grassroots people from our communities that were there. I thank you very much today.
All right, go ahead. First question.
Yeah, Abel Charles, MBC Radio. So I keep talking about and get again, which I'm thanking you. Kaya so check it in me now, kitchen either now can tell it about the Piata and the good town. No skaggy must say now, must say either up in Sovereign Council, Saskatchewan, they got Canada. Dan see the stick and must say and Dan speaking what to get to about that.
Didn't you get me, Abel? You go must say no time snake, I must not mind it, and not talk to Mac and the Stabinani. Prince Albert Council last week, Goma when they all the worst, you asked almost at the Basque and the Saskatchewan. You go on of some snam, Samagan say no stagger to man, Papiata, Kitita in or Hota, a motam some snam, the Matthews you taste at Negan, Tagasketa, Papiatagi, the Motsaki, name or Kitita in. You asked staff with to give me at the Masnam, and Masnag, and the Tassiti Ritamag. You sanny Kitita in or takes Papiatagag. You come in up with the toast to me, I did my massas. Mísit Kitita or Smagansak, my day when the Kista Smagansak, the RCMP, the Migatska, cannot say, stay away or say, Mamscati Tamigo, Camago, Kitawin, Magoti sat Negan, you not your Patamagi, and Antamana, Capamuti, community security guards, the community safety officers, the Giton and Tagina Patago, Kitawin, Keishan Sona with the geese, but that the Bama. Jag att säga kidan och jag kommer kan rasta till suit ni moda att det behöver så histagi och mau inte inte på jag vill. Mau testamentet ni kan giften så man kan se kidan att geben bericht men det titta in och jag och kommer kan jag rasta jag och det suit no rasta ni att titta in att giften det så man kan se kidan att det bedo det jag har putin det testamentet så nej jag synger gitarr när jag kan nästan med mina ögon som inte.
Paul?
Tämän spinantakin tilistintäkin, että nuo vai on muuttamassa näin on sinähän.
Yksi on vaikka tonne, eikä joku niinkään tänne mantaja. Eikä mä näemme jo niinkään, otisat niinkään. Kiisun, kinottia patnia nosta suukittakin tää toskia. Otisat niinkään. Ja kun tevan mainottia pat, mä mistei, kun mä ekskidittiin näin, totta mä nostin, mutta tauta nostikin mä soga ja vaara RCMP. Ikään nodot saga kidan että pedo. Kito the show no, you have any First Nations bylaws. I got you Ogumakan, Rasto Suit, no to the Suit, no BCRs, the Ati, you're going to see Magdit in the Scati, Goyagota, Napi, Otosman, Capi, Kyogago, Federal Minister of Public Safety, Yagota Tagaskito, Titat, Samagansa, Kitagusetano Lotsa, that in that of the Suina. I was to get down or mascots, I get this with us.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Right here.
Go ahead.
To the architect, I guess, of the agreement or the letter of intent, Mr. Vice Chief Tsannie. Vice Chief, tell you to now. John Beldi, I got now. Federal government, some of the rule, federal rule, some of the provincial rule.
Oh, the bunny there, the 2019 bunny then. Did it on with the Grand Council 12 and go there, they see a Lanuhai. The assistant and I'll chikuri young whole la. The assistant that undu had Nenegala now. No hello in our undoril Tibecanil Halatla. It's a Anna the own Nuhanana Suwai Yao Lissi by Hadael to Atlahant how in bets and ho I then Nuhananagas Sinunit a Hudenilla. Did he both oh did he Allah Silla don't that he do Nuhananake Suwaun Lilla Bikuria. It's a Anna La Udaza and habits and ho are Nuhanana Sinunit a Hudenilla. A year Nunail Yadaza. Nuni Nuhananet and Denetic Escodara Yada Undena. Then at other Hisi Yak Adanest how it's a Anna da Nuhanana. A dual year Sikapanhu, our listen Nuhananake, Bahada Yelt Hidden Nihara Yada Acheno Litho. Could Sambago the road, the assistant, the Beldil F division though. Sambago there, the Canada who see the whole Lambedna day. Could out a bunny the Hade Bahade Hijau, then Escodari Yala Ajau, then a Huroi Ajau, Eotung Lauja, Nuhanad Nila Ikezelia. Then a real caro in Hunithana, Yan Nadariti Edosa. Province the Belkun O, Canada the Belkun O, Nuti 12 First Nations the Belkun E. Hanu Hunithana, Nil I Hanu Hanunta. Kudunithanuni the road some bars and int albert then a naneke. The Udasitana Hayat he has seen that Uyat he nezunit out in Harayalis Ekilia, Nanate Agala now, the Agala Nalun Nanate couldn't find there. In it, in 18 months, that are there, it is Troho in the 12 First Nations Day in a Hardic, a honey than see. In see Sananake Hris in Ku, while ya see Bahalo down who has in the Ku, a Yerebunid deha. Nuti Denogini low, and low seat and Dana, what ilo seat Dana. Nu had Nanek Agala Nahoe in the Bahoa, then a Sunhino and now Yinile. Tot in a duli nu halagala none in the Bahoa. It's open to anybody. Yeah. Massive.
Good morning. My name is Chief Harry Cook. I'm a senator. I have a question. Like, I've seen a lot of this in my lifetime. A lot of good words being said. That's lip service. When will this actually get done? That's the key. The other thing is that infrastructure was never mentioned in that MOU, only the good words that were said. That could be okay, but yet we need the infrastructure. We don't want to treat the current system as it is, but yet at the same time, we want to create opportunities for our people as well at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I very much appreciate the question, and I do want to say that the work that is being done by my team at Public Safety Canada, Minister Tell's team here in Saskatchewan, at PAGC, will result in
vision of empowering Indigenous communities to put forward those programs and services and police services which they are prepared to do. That is the whole point of commencing this letter of intent and signing it. And like I said inside the in the General Assembly, to walk the talk. And what's important for you to know is that this is not the only thing that we are doing. My colleagues in federal government, Ministers Haidu, Ministers Miller, other colleagues are working with Indigenous communities across the country to create additional infrastructure around housing, to create that additional capacity around providing health care and mental health care. And the two are tied, because what we hear, you know, when we listen carefully to you and to other communities, is that the root causes of crime, the root causes of loss and anguish, go towards like those social determinants. So these two things, they have to be advanced together. Yes, we need to advance policing initiatives. We need to look at public safety initiatives, but we also have to address the social determinants, which means making sure that there is adequate infrastructure. I mean, it was at James Smith Cree Nation where, you know, there's an elder who passed away, and there's going to be a funeral inside of a school gymnasium today. I think we can do better than that. So I hear you on infrastructure, and yes, we're going to do that work as well.
I did want to ask Minister Medicino, a question about the letter of intent signing. Following this signing, when may we see hard agreements for funding, for personnel assistance, and other things from the federal government start to come to the communities?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. So in the first instance, by signing the letter of intent today with PAGC, we're going to be standing up a PAGC and public safety team that'll be comprised of a PAGC representation from the federal government, and representation from the government of Saskatchewan. That work is going to commence as quickly as possible, beginning early in 2023, so in a matter of months. And it will be supported with the resources that are necessary for that team to do the work. What comes out of that study are the programs, are the initiatives, and if PAGC wishes, the creation of self-administered policing services. And that is how we create the space for, as I said again, inside the General Assembly, policing by Indigenous peoples for Indigenous peoples. So the vision of this letter of intent is to put in place the building blocks and the foundation to get to that moment. But I cannot emphasize enough that it's not just about policing or in law enforcement. I mean, I spent about a decade on the front lines of law enforcement. Minister Tell has extensive experience in law enforcement. We need to look at ways to prevent crime from occurring in the first place. And that's why making sure that there is also support for culturally sensitive training, healing lodges, rehabilitation, reducing recidivism, all has to go on concurrently, even as we're empowering communities to create their own policing services if they wish to. That's the only way we're going to break the cycle of the intergenerational trauma that leads to the loss that we saw on September the 4th in James Smith Cree Nation, and the ongoing loss and anguish that we see out of MMIGW and the residential schools. We have to heal through prevention, and we have to do it in a way that recognizes the inherent right of communities to self-determine their own course, and we're here to support them on that journey.
Follow-up?
I do have a follow-up. I have a follow-up to Vice Chief Tsannie. As the architect of the agreement, I wanted to ask about when looking at models, you mentioned Siksika's police service. I wanted to know where else you may look to for inspiration and ideas.
I guess the inspiration ideas come right from the grassroots, from the community engagement that we're going to be doing, what Minister is talking about. Very important is making sure that we have that engagement right at the grassroots level. There is no one model. We have 28 communities, and we have unique challenges with each of our First Nation communities. What happens in Fond du Lac might not be the same down here. So we have to adjust to the needs that we have in our communities. So there's no one model. Yes, we brought in 2019, we brought in the Navajo. We brought in the First Nations Policing Association from Ontario, the Siksika Nation. We brought in a whole bunch. We brought in First Nation lawyers, First Nations judges, prosecutors within that conference, and we're gathering that information. Like I said earlier, there is no roadmap. And we're developing that roadmap. And we're part of that community safety planning initiative. That's something new. And also the legislation that's going to be drafted up, that's going to be huge. And we need to make sure that we are part of that legislation so we can all be accountable. It can't be drafted up by the federal government or the province. It has to be together. And the RCMP services that we have in our communities, we're not getting rid of. The RCMP will always be there. They'll be our partner, a true meaningful partner in terms of this, in the spirit of reconciliation, what we're talking about. So there is no one model that's out there that we're following. We're going to listen to the grassroots and community needs and base those models based on the uniqueness of our 28 communities. And it's huge. So.
Go ahead.
And another question for you. Does the Prince Albert Grand Council envision different police forces for each of the 12 First Nations or one police force?
We're not there yet. So the engagement will determine how we adjust and design that model based on the needs of our communities. And for sure, we want to provide that support and ongoing training and support and being able to negotiate training and modernize the policing service. Our children see a police officer and they run, they get scared. We need to change that perspective. We need to change the story within our communities regarding policing. So we based on the uniqueness of our communities, it'll be whatever our communities design it to be, to make our community safe for everybody.
The letter of intent is not legally binding. Why is that, and would it have been better if it was?
It's engagement. We can't sign any agreements based on our First Nations because they're a nation. They have the right. We can't sign the rights away of our First Nations. They have to have the buy-in. Once we do that evaluation engagement within the communities, this is the model. This is what we recommend. At that time, if you want hard agreements, we'll do that.
Go ahead.
Question from Mr. Medicino. Thank you, Minister. I'm wondering if you can give us specific timelines around when your government will table this bill, and if you can't give us specific timelines in terms of, I don't know if it's November, December, something like that, specifics around what happens next, who else you're meeting with and when those meetings take place, or wherever the process may be.
Well, in the first case, I would like to table the legislation that recognizes that Indigenous policing is an essential service as quickly as possible. The reason why I say that is because the situation is urgent. Having met this morning at James Smith Cree Nation and being present for those families who remain grief-stricken, that sense of loss has to motivate all of us, not just me and my colleagues at the federal level of government, but our colleagues in Saskatchewan and the First Nations on the ground to move forward with the necessary reforms to Indigenous policing as quickly as possible. I hear the community about that, and I think what's important to unpack for all Canadians is that if we want to do this work, if we want to take not only the letter of intent and translate it into something real, if we want to take our agreement with Siksika and make it something real and tangible, we have to move away from our current model, which is a program-based approach to supporting Indigenous communities around public safety initiatives, and transition to something that is longer term and structural, that recognizes that the relationship between First Nations, Indigenous, and Inuit peoples across the country and governments, again, federal and provincial, has to be rooted in a recognition of the right of Indigenous peoples to chart out their own course on these initiatives. That has to be at the very core of all of this work. So That's what the legislation will accomplish. Yes, it will set out a legal framework, and part of the details that I anticipate will be articulated in that legislation will include shared values and principles that form the cornerstones of that relationship. It will also set out the principle that the relationship between governments and First Nations and Indigenous peoples has to be supported by a long-term, sustainable, predictable fiscal framework. And when you listen to communities about that, the challenges around resourcing, around providing culturally sensitive training, around making sure that those initiatives are led by Indigenous peoples is precisely why this work is so important, and it is urgent. So, I would like to see it introduced as soon as possible, but we also want to make sure that we are doing that work at the pace of communities, which means respecting conventions around consultation with the rights holders and with each individual community, along with our other important partners.
Well, before I get to my follow-up, I'd like to ask clarification. I asked you for, more specific guidelines around that process you just described, the last part of your question. Can you expand on that? Like, how many more consultations do you have? How long do you expect that process to take?
Well, we're doing that. We've already been doing consultations. We published a What We Heard report that's available now, and you can hear from communities that there's still a desire to feed into that process. So we are working around the clock through my officials, reaching out far and wide. And like I said, I think we'll spend the better part of the remainder of the fall doing that, so we can be as thorough and as comprehensive as we can be about co-developing, not just going away and listening, but actually working on this legislation together. And that was something that the Grand Chief said at the very outset of the remarks today in the General Assembly, which is that we have to respect that principle of working together. I think if you go right back to the beginning of where the original sins were in the relationship, it's that treaties were signed, but there wasn't good faith. And we broke faith and we broke trust. So I'm very anxious to get this legislation done as quickly as possible, as expeditiously as possible, but we've got to do it right, and that means co-developing it.
Okay. Now you say, as you're consulting with many different groups, and obviously there are several different groups within the PAGC across Saskatchewan, across the country, but how specific does the Act need to be to move forward on that?
Well, that is a very good question, and we'll be, I think, figuring that out together again. But I also think we need to allow for the reality that communities are diverse. I mean, even within PAGC, we heard that this morning at James Smith Cree, and that's true right across the country. So there has to be sufficient flexibility within the legislation to take a distinctions-based approach when it comes to creating Indigenous policing initiatives, public safety initiatives, wellness initiatives. So it's about finding the balance between putting in place, I think, the fundamental principles that will be the anchor for that framework, while at the same time giving the space for each community to work within it so that we can, as a federal government, as a provincial government, meet them exactly where they are.
All right. Well, I'll take one last question.
Just a quick question for Vice Chief. I assume you've been on the front lines in Ottawa. Could you talk about, since the events at James Smith, did that speed things up and moving towards where we are today from what you saw?
COVID did slow us down a bit because we can't engage our communities. We've been at it since 2018, since the signing of our resolution giving us the marching orders to look at community-based policing for 12 of our First Nations. So COVID did slow us down, and we've been engaged with the engagement sessions in terms of making the Indigenous policing service as an essential service through Zoom, the modern day meeting. We had those opportunities. So we've been engaged right from day one in terms of building that partnership and that trust. If you don't have that trust and partnership with your partners, then things are not going to move ahead. And based on the letter of intent, my intention is, we're building that trust and openness. If there's an obstacle, that we're open and honest about it. Relationship is not going to work if you don't have a good communication, that trust between the parties, then that relationship is not going to last. So we've been building on that, building building those capacities so we can design a model based on the needs of our First Nation communities. It's not up to me. I'm not a policing professional, but the community members will tell you what they want to see in the community and how we want that model to look like.
Follow up?
Oh, just a quick one. From what you saw, did you think the federal government, after the James Smith situation, was a little more prepared to act a little quickly from what you saw?
Of course, their urgency to save our children and our communities. It's unfortunate that things happen, but certainly, you know, it did open a lot of good positive doors for our negotiating and getting us to where we are today. But the work has been happening. We've been meeting for months, and this is where we're at. So the next step is engaging the communities and making sure that we have the input from the communities. That working group, we designed that model and work with our partners in terms of what we need to do. So it's a great opportunity. It's about time. We have the biggest resources in our community, our young people. Why can't we get into the justice field? If we want safety in our communities, we have to do that. Not depend on anybody else to make our community safe. So.
Question for the minister. It's been many, many, many long years since treaties were signed. And I think Chief Cameron said that it was a promise of the treaties to have a red coat in every community for protection. Why has it taken so long?
I think that's a very fair question. And I think there's a complex answer that involves resource challenges, and that's something that, you know, we continue to discuss with the RCMP. But I can assure you that out of the James Smith Cree tragedy, you know, I saw the RCMP mobilize quickly with victim support units to be there in a way that I hope was supportive. And what I hear from the community is that, you know, there's a recognition that the relationship between the RCMP and Indigenous peoples is at times been extremely difficult. You know, going back to the role of the RCMP in residential schools, and RCMP is, as a show of good faith, has apologized for that role, and there's still a long way to go. Not only in, again, resourcing, but in making sure that there is the respect for the communities, for culture, for language, for tragedy that is still being felt today. You know, like in my view, we need to be sure that when communities call for help, that they get it, no matter where you live. And that's the whole point of the work today. The letter of intent, the work that we're doing under First Nations Indigenous Policing Program, the co-development of legislation. It's that Indigenous peoples have every right to get the same standard of policing and public safety as every other non-Indigenous Canadian does. So that's what we're working towards. That's why we're here today. Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes our event today. Thank you for being here. If you have any additional questions that haven't been answered or you think of something later, don't hesitate to send an email to media@ps-sp.gc.ca. Thanks.